I think we should go ahead and get started. I know some people may be a few minutes late logging in, but then there's others that are counting on us to stick to our time frame. So Kyle, we're going to put it back in your hands. Okay. All right, so welcome everyone and hello. I'm Sherry Wells, Executive Director of the New Mexico American Heart Association. We're so glad that each of you are able to join us today to have a really open and honest conversation about what we're calling the new grief. The new grief is something many of us have been feeling amidst the pandemic, and maybe we don't even really know what it is yet. We named this conversation, and it certainly is a conversation based on the chatter we were having before we started, because in addition to losing family members, coworkers during the COVID pandemic, we're also feeling and experiencing what we're calling the new grief. So agitation and irritability. And I know some days I start out the day and I'm all excited and I really think I'm having a good day. And then by maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after 4 or 5 Zoom meetings, I am irritable and cranky and just not able to really figure out what's going on. And I think that that is the key. Like all my friends that I talk to and business associates, and it seems like we end most of our conversations with, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't know. And for many of us, I think for everyone, just the feeling of I don't know can cause us to have depression or grief. And so our speakers today are going to be providing us with tools to work through this and also a space to ask questions. We are muting everyone on the call except for the speakers, and we're going to ask you to use the chat box to put your questions in. We'll do our best to get to all of the questions. I hope we have a lot of them. And we're going to begin with our moderator, Martha Carpenter, who is our Circle of Red chair. She will introduce each speaker, our 2 speakers, and then at the end we'll be following up by a question and answer period, and we'll also be sharing resources for all of you and for our community. So take it away, Martha.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank all of you for joining us today. I think it's going to be very interesting. As Sherry mentioned, I'm the chair for the Circle of Red this year. I'm Martha Carpenter, and I'd like to introduce our speakers today, who is Erin Martinez, PAC with Women Specialist, and Jade Richardson-Bach, who will be speaking. So I'm going to introduce Erin. Erin Martinez, PAC with Women Specialist, with a background in women's health and psychiatry. Erin strives to help her patients reach physical and mental health. Would you help me to welcome Erin, please? Erin, go ahead.
Perfect, thank you very much. Well, I'm Erin Martinez, so I do work at Women's Specialist. I do gynecology, and also right now I'm at a Central Desert, which is a psychiatric hospital in Albuquerque. Perfect. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Nope. Go ahead, Erin.
Okay, so today I'll be talking about mental health and just really focusing on what the pandemic is, how it's affecting all of us. So we'll get started with some statistics. I thought just some of these statistics will help set the stage for what we're talking about. So according to the Carter Center, 1 in 5 American adults experience some form of mental illness. And that's before the pandemic. So definitely something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, less than 50% actually receive treatment. And usually that's because of lack of resources in the community or lack of insurance. So something to keep in mind. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, 56% of adults have said that the pandemic has increased existing issues with sleep, eating, substance abuse, and also worsening chronic conditions. And within that chronic conditions, that includes mental health issues. So that's something that we need to be thinking about during the pandemic as well. I think it's been pretty prevalent in the news that our country is focusing so much on preparing hospitals for infection and how we can prevent the spread of infection. but we need to be thinking about the mental health as well and the effects that even the changes in the hospital setting have had on mental health. So before the pandemic, about 1 of every 8 emergency department visits were because of mental illness and substance abuse. And unfortunately, because of the changes and because of those restrictions, a lot of these people that would normally present to the emergency department for care are not going because they're scared of contracting the coronavirus. So not everyone is going in for things that they would normally need treatment for. And even with the changes in the coronavirus, and we're always hearing about the number of deaths, which is, of course, something we need to be paying attention to, but suicide is still the second leading cause of death in ages 10 to 34, and still the 10th nationwide. So always something that we really should be thinking about. I also wanted to bring up the impact of the economy on mental health. I think this is something that is on everybody's mind. So I did find a study that was done by Julie Phillips and Colleen Newgert, and they were focusing on mental health during the Great Depression. And they discovered that for every 1 point increase in the unemployment rate, there was about a 1.6% increase in the suicide rate. And from what I've found and through my research, it seems to be that these values still hold today. So in July of this year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics noted that our unemployment rate is currently 11.1%, and that's up from 3.5% in February. So just think about, the increase in unemployment rate and what that is doing to our suicide rate and mental health in this country. So thinking about those statistics, I'll move on to really what people are experiencing in their day-to-day during the pandemic. So there's definitely economic uncertainty. People are losing jobs. Even when you're able to work, many businesses are being affected by this, which just causes uncertainty in the financial realm. Social isolation, you're having to social distance. This is causing loneliness. For some people who are already socially isolated, they're not able to go about their normal routine. So that's something to think about. Uncertainty of the future. So we talk about people having to cancel plans and you're not able to travel like you normally would. So that's changed. Loss of normalcy. Your normal day-to-day life, of course, is affected by wearing a mask every day, and that's changed, but also people having to work from home. Kids are at home. They're not able to go to school, be with their friends. So that's something to think about. And of course, fear for one's own health and your family's health. And I'm sure this is on everybody's mind all the time. You're doing what you can to protect yourself and your family, but we really just don't know exactly who we're coming in contact with, who they've been in contact with. So there's always some level of fear there. So going into what people are experiencing now, what are people feeling? So there are many feelings going around, and as Sherry brought up earlier, there's anger and anxiety. You can have fear, stress, sadness. I think a lot of these feelings that people are experiencing can really be summed up into one word, which is grief. Next slide, thank you. So grief, we think about the stages of grief. It's important to remember that the stages are not necessarily linear. You can experience them in different orders and experience them some multiple times. But denial is where we start. I think we see that very clearly in the news and people thinking that this pandemic isn't real, the coronavirus isn't real, that it's not going to affect them. Anger about the restrictions, about having to wear a mask every day, about the changes that are happening. Bargaining, people are thinking, if we just do this for 3 more weeks, it will be over, and they're kind of trying to bargain their way out of that. And then depression, of course, goes with all of the changes and can be exacerbated by multiple things. Of course, our goal is always to get to acceptance, so it's important to focus on what we really have control over and to just take it day by day. So grief is kind of the main focus there.
Erin, can I interrupt for a second and ask a question about that diagram that you just showed us? Is that the same stages of grief if we have lost a loved one? So is it the same stages? And that's why we thought this was so important to talk about, is because, you know, we probably are, those of us that are feeling the grief from the loss of what we thought was our everyday life and interaction, or seeing our children who are sad and acting out because they're not seeing their friends. So this, thank you for the graphic. This really helps make sense of, for me anyway, some of the feelings that I know I feel. Sometimes all of them in one day, which is exhausting.
It can be exhausting, and they can go back and forth, and you can experience it multiple stages, like I said, at the same time, or even multiple, you know, go around about in different ways. So I think it's definitely something that you can be going through every day, especially with the changes that are occurring.
Yeah, thank you.
So then I wanted to really think about, okay, well, everything that's happening, what's exacerbating these issues even further? And I think an important note is all the false information, the conflicting information that's been out there. So the updates, you know, are changing every day. They vary by city, state, even country. So I think that's causing a lot of grief and stress because people are not knowing where to focus their attention. Environmental changes, and we kind of touched on this earlier about that loss of normalcy in your environment, but kids are at home, people are trying to work from home, so that can cause its own stress. And I wanted to bring attention also that the World Health Organization said during this pandemic, with all of those home changes, they've had a 60% increase in domestic violence. So
And Erin,
definitely something to consider when you're seeing patients and when you're talking to friends and family, to be aware of that.
Erin, we had one question, and I'm glad you're on that topic about kids at home. And they asked, do we see a higher risk of children increasing in suicide now with the coronavirus?
So unfortunately, I was looking for those statistics. I think a lot of those studies just aren't completed yet because it's still so new and we're learning new things every day. But kind of going back to one of the original notes is that suicide is still always the second most common cause of death for ages 10 to 34. So when you know, think about that and then think about their changes of their day-to-day life, they're not able to see friends, they're not going to school. I think it's reasonable to assume that that's going to exacerbate that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then I wanted to think about some unique situations. I think that, you know, some of these situations are difficult anyway, but they're being made more difficult with the pandemic. So deliveries, people have been having to go deliver their children without anyone with them, or they're only allowed to have one family member. My cousin actually had to deliver her son in Brooklyn during this pandemic, and she had to go in without anybody with her. So I know that was very stressful for her. Hospitalizations, again, people are having to go in without family members or only one family member. That can be stressful, especially when that family member may have to make some difficult decisions and they don't have the support they need while in the hospital to do that. And funerals. I think that's kind of been a unique situation for many people during this because there's been somewhat of a backlog on cremation, so things are taking longer. People aren't allowed to have the numbers that would normally be at a funeral, so people aren't allowed to grieve loss of a family member in the same way that we're used to. So what can we do about it? And these are just more some obvious things I think that people think of, but exercise can reduce stress. So yoga is definitely something to consider, which is why I included the pictures of yoga poses. Meditation is important. Social contact with social distancing is something I brought up because, again, back to the isolation, how can we help people stay in touch with one another? And fortunately, we live in a day and age where there's so much technology in order to do that. So FaceTime, Zoom, what we're doing right now. So encouraging people to reach out to family and friends in that way if they can't see them directly. Telehealth, I've seen this trying to be incorporated in many practices with other providers, but something important to note for telehealth is many counselors and therapists are starting to move to telehealth as well. So for people who maybe need that extra outlet, that is a possibility. And staying informed, again, back to that false information, try to make sure that you're staying up to date for your community and the most recent closures and information. So again, with what can we do? These three more pertain to healthcare providers, but paying close attention to those who are at increased risk and remembering back that 1 in 5 American adults already have a pre-existing mental issue. So thinking about them and how they're being affected is a group of people that you should be, really keeping increased, close eye on. Prepare for long-term impact. I've read a lot of articles about this, and I didn't really have specific numbers because people are predicting different things. But with most events that can be catastrophic, whether war or the pandemic, we've seen long-term impacts on mental health. And so I think we have to be prepared that in the coming years, this is going to have lasting effects on depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse as well. We've already seen a huge increase in alcohol sales, which is not a good thing during this pandemic, right? People are kind of turning to that as a coping mechanism. So something to be prepared for the long term. And of course, taking care of yourself. Many studies out there are showing that frontline workers are at increased risk. Not only are we seeing patients all day, every day, but especially for those in emergency departments and ICUs that are seeing, the first hand what's happening with the pandemic. So being sure to care for yourself as well.
So Erin, I have a quick question. Is there signs that we can see if somebody is experiencing any of these things that you just talked about? Is there any kind of indication that we would know that a family member or friend or a coworker is experiencing this?
Yeah, and if you're doing it more, not in necessarily a healthcare setting, but I think asking your loved ones and friends if they are experiencing loss of interest, how are their sleeping habits and eating habits? A lot of people are having decreased sleep, which can definitely add to depression and grief just because of your mood changes. So that can come with fear and anxiety. I think opening the conversation up to how your mood is, how you're feeling is something important to do with your family and friends, just to check in and also let them know that they have an outlet and someone who's there to listen and care about those things. I think, unfortunately, there's still a stigma against mental health in this country and really the world, right? So if we can start opening that conversation up to family and friends, hopefully that they'll pass that on. So I think that's important for us all to keep in mind.
Great.
Great. That's good to hear.
And then the last slide I just wanted to put out there that these are resources for those in need. I frequently pull these up to give them to patients, but just really important to have on hand. So I have to throw a little shout out to Agora at the end. They do have a national helpline, but they're also local here in Albuquerque. And they're great. I used to volunteer with them. So they're an amazing resource for those in need as well.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you very much. I'm going to, this isn't on our script, Martha, but I'm going to break in for a commercial. I forgot to mention at the beginning that for each of you that have logged in today, your name is going into a drawing, and we're going to be drawing for a $100 gift certificate from the Oasis at Women's Specialists of New Mexico. So be sure, and hopefully you can hang in here to the end, and we'll draw a name toward the end. And then I just wanted to make just a quick thank you to the Circle of Red for hosting, or not hosting this, but for sponsoring this today. Our Circle of Red is a passionate group of local leaders who use their influence, generosity, and ambassadorship to help increase awareness of heart disease and to inspire women to take charge of their heart health. There's several Circle of Red members on the call today, and as we mentioned, Martha Carpenter is the chair. But some of the activities that Circle of Red have done, we were hosted by Heart Hospital, where we were able to have a conversation and education moment with a female cardiologist. We made 100 bags of necessities with socks and toiletries and things for teens here in New Mexico, homeless teens, and we donated those to a drop-in center for those homeless teens. And then just this last January, we were hosted by Sandia BMW. So those are the commercial breaks, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Martha Carpenter.
Thanks, Sherry. And Erin, thank you so much. If anybody has any other kind of questions, please put them in the chat box. But if not, we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Jade Richardson Bach. And let me give you her introduction. Jade Richardson Bach has worked in the grief and loss community since 2003. In 2014, she co-authored Parenting Through Grief with Dr. Craig Pierce, a guide to grieving a significant loss while raising young people who are also grieving. In 2019, she founded learningaboutloss.com, a collection of resources and expert advice on navigating life after death. As the executive director of the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico for over a decade, Ms. Bach has spent hundreds of hours facilitating grief support groups with children, teens, young adults, and their adult caregivers. Her most meaningful and poignant education on how families grieve began at age 17 when her father was killed in a plane crash. Please welcome Jade Richardson Bach.
Yay!
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Erin. Such good information. You know, the stages of grief are something we talk about all the time. And yeah, you're exactly right. They're not necessarily linear, and often you might think you've gotten through them and then surprise, something's back. So what I'm gonna talk about for our time together today, just briefly touching on grief and this collective trauma that we're going through, talking a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder, and then also post-traumatic growth, which honestly is my favorite thing to talk about. And also I want to spend some time on how we can develop a personal plan to thrive, because self-care means something different to all of us. So if you will indulge me, let's take a minute and get settled in, and I want to do just a little guided visualization. And take a deep breath, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes and just listening to my voice, or you can look down at something right in front of you. And what I'm going to talk to you about is your refrigerator at home. So maybe you're at home right now, but I want you to imagine that you're standing in front of your refrigerator at home. You're gonna open the door, and this refreshing blast of cool air is gonna hit you right in the face. And oh, your refrigerator is so clean, congratulations. And right in the center of your refrigerator is a bowl of lemons. They're yellow and clean. And one of those lemons has been cut into wedges. And I'd like you to reach into your refrigerator and pick up that slice of lemon and take a big juicy bite. Okay, that's the end of our little guided visualization.
Wow.
Did anybody feel like their mouth was kind of watering? Like, there might be something sour coming my way. That's just a quick indication of how powerful the connection between our mind and our body is. And it's that powerful connection is with us every day, all day. And the good news is that we're in charge of that connection. And that might also be the bad news, that we're in charge of that connection. But we can learn, we can always learn. I love Maya Angelou, I love her writing, and she said, when we know better, we do better. And so we can always learn how to take the reins of that connection a little bit more every day. I love this quote when we're talking about self-care from an essayist named Brianna Weist, and everything I'm going to refer to, all these books and everything are in my, at the end of my PowerPoint, and we can send those references out to you if you would like to spend more time in them. But she wrote, true self-care is not salt baths and chocolate cake. It's creating a life you do not have to regularly escape from. And like Erin said, we're all grieving a collective trauma, and our routines and our places of comfort, whether for you they were the church or the bar, are no longer safe. Even going to the grocery store causes a new level of anxiety. Although I know I am more profoundly aware every day than I ever was before how grateful I am for the workers who are part of that huge complex that creates our food systems and provides grocery store access for me and my family every day. So whenever we're talking about changing something, whether it's addressing a need in our community, or dealing with an issue at work or our family or ourselves, the very first step is awareness, right? We have to know what's going on before we can know what steps we can take to address them. We know that we're in an unprecedented time. We know that we're experiencing trauma on a massive scale as a huge society, and we know that that leads to grief. My favorite definition of grief, one that I've used with children for over a decade, is that grief is a name for the feelings that we feel whenever we lose something important to ourselves. Grief is almost involuntary, kind of like love. Grief can feel like it's something that's happening to you. And that can be really hard. But there are things that we can do, and there are lessons we can learn that will help us manage that. And in all things, the first step is awareness. And there's been so much great information in our community and world over the last several years about the concept of mindfulness. And that's really about paying attention to what's going on in our heart, in our body, in our mind at any given time. And that gets better with practice. And in New Mexico, we have wonderful courses on MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and those are also in my resources link, but there's a lot of different ways we can learn about it. I just want to bring to your attention that it's hard, it takes practice, and our brains are like, I learned this from a course I took several years ago where the presenter said, our brains are Teflon for the good stuff slides right off, right? But they're Velcro for the bad stuff. And, if you've ever been, in a traffic jam or gotten some critical feedback from your boss or had a sideways conversation with your precious little teenager, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're going to hold on and ruminate over those negative experiences more than you'll necessarily hold on and ruminate the positive experiences. And that makes sense. That's the way that our brains have developed over eons to keep us safe. And if you think about our ancestors who had to remember the poisonous berries, they had to remember the tiger in the cave, they had to remember the bad things. And so we really come from a long, long line of pessimists. And that helps me remember that this is the way my brain works, and I have to work to sort of change the script, to change what my brain is ruminating on, and it takes practice. So if we use our awareness, okay, just starting to pay attention to how we're feeling as we progress throughout the day. Sherry mentioned, kind of hitting a slump, and I think that's part of our circadian rhythms as well, which are all different. Some people are larks, they're like bright and productive in the morning. Some people are night owls, they're more productive in the evening. Paying attention to our circadian rhythm and honoring that so we can be productive when our body wants to be productive, and we can rest when our body wants to rest. This is a time where we can really start to take advantage of that, including siestas. all right? But paying attention to what makes us feel stressed, heart pounding, sweaty, shaky, teary. We do an activity with kids at the Children's Grief Center where very young children, you know, often don't have names for feelings, right? They're not going to say, I was feeling hypervigilant in school today and it was a challenge for me to pay attention to my math lesson. They might say, I was feeling jitterbuggy. So one of the things we do to help kids talk about how their grief and their feelings are impacting their body is we roll out a big roll of butcher paper and we trace the outline of each child on the butcher paper, and then they're given stickers and markers and they can decorate that outline to represent themselves. And then we give them a box of Band-Aids and we say, put the Band-Aids on the place where it hurts. And I've done this exercise countless times. I've seen hundreds of these completed renderings of children and where it hurts. And where it hurts, they tend to put the Band-Aids on their throat and on their stomach. They often talk about ear aches, and those are the ways that they feel stress and pain. So paying attention to all the members of our family and how they're feeling, because grief manifests differently in all of us. Using your awareness also to pay attention to the good stuff. What makes you feel calm? What makes you feel like you're in the zone? What activities do you really enjoy? Is it, you know, what parts of your job do you love? What parts of being a member of your family or community do you love? And what can you do more about that? What can you do more of in those things, I should say? And remember, we're in charge. We're in charge of our self-care, and we're in charge of how we respond to all the situations that we find ourselves in. It's a lot of responsibility. I'm not saying that's great news necessarily, but it can be. So in this crisis that we find ourselves in, maybe we can take a pause to think about what we would like to have more of in our lives, in our organizations, in our community. How can we rework and rebalance our tasks, our priorities, and our commitments to create more of what we want? There's new information coming out every day about how we can respond to this pandemic, this situation we've never found ourselves in before, not in my generation. We're forced to reevaluate and to recalibrate, and we can set aside time, like we're setting aside right now, to think about those things. You know, if you're an entrepreneur, you've probably heard you need to take time to work on your business, not just in your business. And the same thing applies for our lives. This is the time, my friends. In politics, they say, don't waste a good crisis. This is our one wild and precious life, to paraphrase poet Mary Oliver, and it's also an incredible opportunity to accelerate and implement change. If you look at the ways that our businesses, our schools, our offices have responded to this crisis rather quickly and rather effectively, all things considered, we know that we have a powerful ability to adapt. And I'm excited to see what continues to come from these things.
Jade, let me ask you a quick question. To that point, is it better to lay down if you're feeling overwhelmed or get up and exercise?
You know, that's a good question, and I'll give you my opinion, but I'd love to hear Dr. Martinez's opinion too, since she's a doctor and I'm not. I know that when we're talking about people in trauma and an acute crisis, we say 7 minutes. If you can take 7 minutes to walk outside in the fresh air, to feel sunshine on your face, to breathe deeply, in those 7 minutes, you can begin to change the chemicals that your brain is washing in, all of the cortisol and adrenaline, all that stress. So if you're in a crisis of overwhelm, an anxiety situation, a panic attack, you've just gotten really horrific news, 7 minutes to breathe and be outside in the sunshine is really, really helpful, or even just 7 minutes to breathe. And Erin, what would you suggest? You know, take a nap or get on the treadmill?
Well, I would agree that, you know, if you're in the middle of having a panic attack and anxiety, it's always better to try and reduce what's going on and try and calm yourself with breathing exercises, maybe taking a light walk, but something just to kind of center yourself, bring your heart rate back down. That's what I would suggest when you're actually in it. Exercise is more something to do to maintain and try and reduce your stress on a day-to-day level, but not when you're in the midst of an actual anxiety or panic attack.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And, you know, exercise, I know, always helps us sort of maintain an equilibrium. But if you're in a current crisis, you know, one thing we do with children too, and I think everything we do with children, we should be doing with adults. But one thing we do with children is when we talk about, you know, feeling those feelings in our heart and our chest, like our heart's going to burst out of our chest, we can't breathe, we feel like we're going to cry, our throat's closing up. On that 7-minute trip outside or that walk, that change of environment, you can also splash cold water on your face. That helps to kind of shock your brain into a new reality very briefly. But we talk about naming 5 things you can see, then name 4 things that you can hear, then name 3 things that you can feel, name 2 things that you can taste. You know, like those kind of step by step, and you know, you can reorder them in any way you want. But if those exercises that force us to pay attention to what's happening now help calm us more quickly than our brains do. And you know, this is all normal stuff. Our brains are reacting to threats the way they're supposed to. We
Jake,
just have...
we have one question in the chat box that says, how do we handle the stress associated with the election in November and the aftermath? People are so paralyzed right now.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I have a degree in political science and I find all of this really fascinating stuff. But in all things that can feel beyond our control and feel overwhelming, breaking it down into smaller steps. What can I do to keep myself and my family healthy today? What can I do to help my organization, my community today? You know, that's how we eat an elephant, is one bite at a time. November's a long way away. I'm going to talk a little bit here in a couple minutes about television news, and that might help too.
Okay.
So, and remember, we're all in the same boat. Post-traumatic growth is this theory that's been around. I first learned about it in 2008. And it's kind of it's a possible outcome after a traumatic event and even the collective trauma that we're going through right now as a society. I think post-traumatic stress disorder gets a little more press. We've probably all heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, but not as many of us have heard of post-traumatic growth. The Duke University was doing a study on siblings who had been through a traumatic event as children, and how the interesting phenomenon that one sibling might be able to, you know, when we talk about the stages of grief, get to that stage of acceptance and get to that place of being able to reinvest in life with perspective. And another sibling might be kind of stuck in a cycle of self-defeating behaviors. And Father Richard Rohr is a priest in the South Valley, and he said many years ago, he said, pain that is not transformed is transmitted. And when we're stuck in a cycle of pain, we're transmitting that pain to ourselves and to our community with our unhealthy coping techniques, which is all of us just doing the best we can. But I think we also have all seen examples of people exhibiting post-traumatic growth, whether we knew that's what it was called or not. If you know someone, or maybe you yourself and your family have been through a really difficult event, and you come out the other side a little different, maybe you have a greater sense of gratitude and appreciation. Cultivating a gratitude practice is always good business, okay? Spending some intentional time every morning or every evening listing 3 things that you're grateful for can help change that Teflon for the good stuff part of our brain and help remind us about all the wonderful things that we have to be grateful for. And even in the darkest depths of despair, we can find something to be grateful for. Having a changed sense of priorities after emerging from a difficult experience, like, you know, at the Grief Center, we deal with people who have gone through something pretty horrific and unexpected. And we say, now you are part of a club that you never wanted to join, that you didn't deserve and you didn't ask for. The club that knows that bad things sometimes happen to good people. But you're also a part of a club now who no longer cares how white your grout is. You have a changed sense of priorities. And that can lead to deeper connection, more real relationships, a greater sense of our personal strength. You know, when we say, wow, look at all this stuff I've already been through. I figured that out. I'm going to figure this out. So that means that we begin to identify not as victims of our circumstances, of our choices, but as survivors and even thrivers. And then ultimately, you know, corresponding with Kubler-Ross's phase of acceptance, the recognition of new possibilities, new paths for one's life and one's spiritual development. We hear a lot on the news these days. I love that grief is being talked about in the Harvard Business Review and on morning television news shows. I'm like, yeah, let's get grief in the conversation, because you know what? It's coming to all of us. It's a very normal part of life. We're all going to grieve the loss of something that we care about. We just so rarely want to talk about it as a community. We don't know what to say. It sounds kind of icky. But now it's in front of us. And we hear this phrase, the new normal. The new normal. And I'll tell you that experienced grievers know it has to be a new normal, because there's never a way to go back to the way things were. You know too much now. You're too smart. You're not going to go back to the way things were. It's all going to be different. Even when we can gather safely in public spaces again, and I'm super duper looking forward to that, we're going to be different. And that's okay. That's okay. You know, and our jobs are important to us. Our external, you know, signs of success are important to us. Our vacation plans are important to us. All of these things are important to us. But the most important thing to us should be how well we sleep at night, should be how clear our conscience is, should be how good we feel about how we're contributing to our lives, our families, our organizations, our coworkers, our communities, our nation, our world. Is our side of the street clean? And you know, one of the privileges of being a grief and loss professional and working with dying and deceased and grieving people for almost 20 years now, maybe it's also one of the pitfalls, is that I encounter endless examples of people whose loved one woke up in the morning and tied their shoes just like any normal Tuesday, and then someone else was untying their shoes for them. I mean, life changes on a dime. And, you know, we've seen all of these news reports about the coronavirus death rates in front of our faces every single day. Like Aaron mentioned, suicide is still a really high death rate. And I know just from studying death statistics and looking at death lists in hospitals as part of my work, that more than 6 people are dying across our state every day from other causes anyway. I think about 50 people a day die in New Mexico right now. And I know about 11,000 people a year die in Bernalillo County. This is on a normal year, it's not COVID deaths. And so that's about 30 people a day in Bernalillo County as part of that, about 50 people a day across New Mexico. And I, just as a side note, I wonder if we can make this drastic commitment as a community to keep our people safe and to try and address this contagious pandemic. I wonder what else we can do. I wonder if we can also work to address the deficits that we have in our mental health care or our really huge substance abuse problem, which has been with us for years. And these are all just different coping techniques trying to deal with the pain that we have from different events in our lives. But this is the one life you get. So let's try and keep some promises to ourselves. So knowing that true self-care is not chocolate cake and salt baths, although maybe occasionally it is chocolate cake and salt baths. I'm certainly not downing chocolate cake and salt baths. I just want to remind us that when our stress level goes up, and everybody's stress level is up now, our self-care tends to go down. I think as women, and if we are mothers, if we are in positions of leadership as well, we tend to put other priorities ahead of our own. And I just want to give everybody here permission to fill up your cup, to find a way to replenish yourself so you can continue in this marathon that we're all in, and we don't know when it's going to end. We have to manage our stress levels so that we can be of service to the people who count on us, ourselves, our family, our clients, our community. And so I'm going to share with you a bunch of ideas for daily self-care, and none of these have to cost anything. And they're all just about being mindful, being in the moment, doing something to take care of ourselves. And here I mentioned specifically the 7 minutes of movement that can reset our brain, very powerful stuff. 7 minutes of stretching, 7 minutes of deep breathing, and you can certainly do more than 7 minutes, but 7 minutes is a good place to start. And to talk a little bit more about the dang news. Okay, so when I was a kid, it was my civic duty to watch the evening news, but I say turn off the news now. And turning off the news is advice that we are given as people who work with a traumatized population already. That's been standard advice for years, because the news is not necessarily about keeping us informed of relevant information about our community. The news has become more about scaring the pants off of us, creating a visceral response to keep us coming back for more, and to increase ratings and advertising revenue. The news don't care about us. We do need to find ways to stay judiciously informed. So my recommendation is to consume mindfully. Try to look at different sources of information and feel free to turn it off. Think about what you're actually hearing and how much it's actually helping you. And when we have young children in the home, definitely turn it off. After 9/11, when we saw repeated film of planes flying into the Twin Towers and of the Pentagon burning, we found that our children, every time they saw those images, they thought it was happening again. They didn't understand that it was a repeat of the one horrific event. So be a little mindful about the news. There's lots of things you could do weekly to take care of yourself and to connect with yourself. And if you're like me, you need to get these things on your calendar. They are not just going to naturally happen, right? You have to keep promises to yourself. Schedule some things for yourself monthly. There's this little line here that says develop your 3 hobbies, and that comes from a suggestion that I heard somewhere in some self-care class I've taken, because trust me, I've taken a million of these guys because I had to learn it all the hard way. create 3 hobbies for yourself. One that's creative, one that's physical, and one that makes you money. I've never found the hobby that makes you money, but you know, it sounds like a good idea to aim for, so I'm going to share it with you. And if you figure out a great hobby that makes you money, that's not a multi-level marketing scheme, feel free to email me. My contact information is on the slide. Yearly things, we can take a pause to stop and look back on our year, including looking at our professional calendar. Where were the spaces that we were successful, that we felt like we were in the flow, we were doing really good? Do we have any repetitive meetings that are nonsense and we can get rid of them? Just look at your calendar critically. You know, a lot of us, especially in the social profit world, we are really experienced strategic planners. And I encourage you to take your skills as a strategic planner and turn them around into your own life. This is a picture of Bliss State Park. And so I challenge us all to try and get to a state of bliss, even in the midst of this crisis. If you are in a position of management, if you are the leader of your firm or your family, I encourage you to think about how you can support the people who count on you to getting to that place of bliss. And remember to keep your promises to yourself. And I think those are the key things that I wanted to share with our time together today. I want to mention quickly that I'm coming from the Grief Resource Center and the Children's Grief Center. So if you want to find out more information about ongoing grief support, right now we serve people who are grieving the death of a loved one, people of all ages and stages, and we're adding in some new support services this fall as well. We're doing everything remotely. We do workshops, we do grief groups. And so we have a lot of resources available for you to use. And if you have any questions or even suggestions for us, please reach out.
Thank you, Jade. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions. Sherry, do we have a few minutes?
We have a few minutes, and then don't forget, we're going to be drawing for that gift certificate from Oasis Spa, which is part of Women's Specialists.
There was one question, Jade, that, let me get it here, was talking about having elderly parents that they have to take care of that are ill, and then having to take them to rehabilitation and all of their visits, but at the same time, having to take care of their own children in their household. What do you recommend as far as some kind of management relief for them?
First of all, that is a very, very difficult situation, but many of us have found ourselves in that at one time or the other. And maybe you've heard the term sandwich generation, and that's where you are. So calling upon resources and taking time out to really strategically look at how you can include additional help. It's not reasonable to expect for you to be responsible for everybody's needs at all times. And there are often people in our lives, family members, even professional providers who say, call on me if there's anything I can do. And then they exit stage left, right? Call on those people. You know, look for places in your calendar where you need help, be it with transportation, be it with repeatable tasks. You know, I need someone to take my kids for the afternoon. I need someone to get, you know, groceries. I mean, how can you rely on technology? And it might take a few days or weeks of planning and involving other people, but that's a really tough spot. And there are resources that help folks who are supporting people who are aging. The city's RSVP services are about supporting seniors and people who take care of seniors. And I'm sure there are others that are not just coming to my mind right now. So you might want to try calling United Way's 311 number, describing the situation and seeing if there are other resources they might recommend to help come up with strategies. And also, it's okay to carve out some time for yourself each day and each week, as hard as it is.
And Erin, a question for you. It's the same. If they have older parents that they're having to take care of, and then their immediate family and their kids and work and overwhelmed, what do you suggest for them?
Unfortunately, I'm seeing quite a bit of this right now too with the psychiatric hospital. I think even the nursing homes are becoming overwhelmed with the lack of resources they have for these people. So I think it's important to really, going back to that acceptance on our grief, that what can you control? What can you do? Making lists of things that are within your control can be helpful for managing expectations as well. Carving time out for yourself during the day, taking care of yourself, picking one of those things that you can do to meditate or exercise, just kind of for your overall wellness. But there's no specific fix. It's really per person, how they're being affected by it and what's going on in their life. So I think that managing expectations is a really big part of it right now, because some things are just not going to get better immediately. But finding what resources are available. And I've had I think some facilities around town also, especially for, families taking care of elderly, are trying to incorporate Zoom and FaceTime. And so seeing what extra resources are being provided is something to research and look into as well for people who are away from their loved one but still caring for them.
Thank you, Erin. I'm going to turn it back to Sherry because we want to see who won the drawing too.
I know you do. I should do a roll. What is it? Drum roll. Oh my gosh! Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Jade, for really, really great information. I think, let's see, raise a hand. Should we do this more often? You can find your little hand in your Zoom tools there, and just let me know. Email me and let me know what other topics you'd like, because I think this was extremely valuable today. I want to thank Circle of Red for sponsoring us, and then also, as I said, we'll be sending out a copy of this Zoom event and PowerPoints, and you'll see more information coming back out from American Heart. And we just really, really, really appreciate everyone joining us today and for your support. And last but not least, I can see her, I'm looking straight at her. Rainey Veal won the gift certificate. Yay, Rainey, thank you.
And Sherry, that was donated by whom?
Women's Specialists of New Mexico, and that is the practice group that Erin is a provider at. So, Rainey, we'll make plans to get together socially distanced to do the handoff. And thank you again. Rainey's been a big supporter, a member of Circle of Red, and thank you all again. So, if you have any more questions or you want to learn more about Circle of Red, join that group. Just let me know at sherry.wells@heart.org. Thank you, everyone. A big thank you to Kyle and Davida, who were behind the scenes making sure, Sonia, that we ran this in a good way. Thank you.
Thank all of you for
Bye.
spending time with us. Bye, everybody.
Bye.